The case against Nick Reiner, the 32-year-old son of renowned Hollywood director Rob Reiner and producer-photographer Michelle Singer Reiner, appears deceptively stagnant at first view. Yet beneath the surface, profound legal, psychological, and ethical questions are unfolding in a Los Angeles courtroom, transforming what might seem like a straightforward, albeit tragic, family homicide into one of the most complex and disturbing criminal proceedings in recent memory. On December 14, 2025, Rob Reiner, 78, best known for directing films such as When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men, and This Is Spinal Tap, and his wife Michelle, 70, were discovered stabbed to death in their Brentwood home. Multiple sharp force injuries were listed as the cause of death. Their son, Nick, was arrested later that same day and subsequently charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Prosecutors have added special circumstance allegations, elevating the potential penalties to life imprisonment without parole, or, depending on the case's trajectory and California law, even the death penalty. Despite the gravity of these charges, the proceedings remain stalled at a preliminary stage. As of early 2026, Nick Reiner has not yet entered a plea, neither guilty nor not guilty, and a formal arraignment, where defendants typically hear the charges read aloud and respond, has been repeatedly delayed. The primary reason traces back to a dramatic shift in legal representation. During what was supposed to be his arraignment hearing in January 2026, high-profile defense attorney Alan Jackson unexpectedly withdrew from the case. The judge granted a continuance, allowing the Los Angeles County Public Defender's Office to assume representation. This new team needed time to review the extensive evidence and, crucially, to evaluate Nick's mental condition before any further steps could proceed. Such delays are not mere procedural hurdles, they reflect a fundamental legal principle. In California, as in most U.S. jurisdictions, a defendant's competency to stand trial is a threshold requirement. If serious doubts exist about whether the accused can understand the nature of the proceedings or meaningfully assist in their own defense, the court must halt everything until competency is restored. Or if restoration proves impossible, alternative dispositions may be considered. Competency evaluations focus narrowly on 2 questions. Does the defendant comprehend the charges against them? And can they rationally collaborate with their attorney to mount a defense? It is distinct from an insanity defense, which addresses whether the person knew right from wrong at the time of the crime. A finding of incompetency does not erase charges, absolve responsibility, or excuse the alleged acts. It simply pauses the trial process. Multiple sources close to the investigation and Nick's condition have expressed deep concerns that he currently meets neither prong of the competency standard. Reports indicate he has exhibited behaviors described as almost childlike in custody, and his mental state has raised questions about his ability to participate in his defense. Adding to the complexity, Nick has a documented history of severe mental health struggles and substance abuse. He was previously placed under a year-long mental health conservatorship in 2020, which permitted involuntary psychiatric treatment, and he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, according to accounts from TMZ and other outlets. Friends and associates have described a pattern of cycling in and out of rehab facilities, often returning to the family home amid ongoing battles with addiction and instability. Further layers emerge from accounts of those who knew him during periods of treatment. One individual who claims to have encountered Nick in a rehabilitation setting has spoken publicly about observing a deep-seated, suppressed anger in him, not necessarily directed at his parents in an overt way, but toward an unexpected something that simmered beneath the surface. While such anecdotal insights from rehab peers remain unverified in court and should be treated cautiously, they contribute to a portrait of a young man grappling with profound internal turmoil in the weeks and days leading up to the tragedy. This case underscores how mental illness, when intertwined with violent crime, can complicate justice in profound ways. The Reiner's other children, including Jake and Romy, have publicly mourned their parents while navigating the unimaginable fallout involving their brother. Friends of the family have emphasized that Rob and Michelle, known for their compassion, would likely not wish to see Nick suffer unduly if severe mental illness played a central role. As the Public Defender's Office conducts its assessment and potential competency hearings loom, the proceedings remain frozen, a deliberate pause that prioritizes due process over speed. What began as a shocking Hollywood family tragedy has evolved into a stark examination of how the justice system grapples with the intersection of severe mental illness and alleged violence. In the wake of the tragic stabbing deaths of filmmaker Rob Reiner, 78, and his wife Michelle Singer, Reiner, 70, at their Brentwood home on December 14, 2025, their son Nick Reiner, now charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, remains in custody, as questions about his mental competency dominate the early stages of the case. Sources close to a TMZ investigation, including producers and insiders familiar with the probe, have described Nick's demeanor in jail as strikingly childlike. One producer characterized him as exhibiting an almost infantile confusion, unable to fully grasp his surroundings or the gravity of his situation. According to these accounts, while Nick acknowledges that he killed his parents, he appears incapable of processing the broader implications: why he is detained, what the criminal justice system entails, or what consequences might follow. This distinction is crucial in legal terms. As mental health experts and legal observers have long noted in similar high-profile cases, an individual can admit to an act while remaining incompetent to stand trial due to a lack of rational understanding of the proceedings against them. At present, the court is not weighing guilt or innocence. Instead, evaluations are focused on determining whether Nick possesses the mental stability required for the case to proceed. Until that competency hearing concludes, the legal process remains effectively paused. Compounding the tragedy are emerging details about the days leading up to the killings. Sources familiar with the investigation told TMZ that Nick allegedly expressed interest in obtaining a firearm shortly before the murders occurred. While authorities have not confirmed any active attempt to acquire one, the mere expression of that desire alarmed those aware of it. One insider emphasized that the concern centered not on the eventual weapon, a knife, as confirmed by police, but on Nick's apparent mindset in those final days. The issue wasn't what he had, the source said, but what was going through his mind to even want a gun. Witnesses and those monitoring the situation described a rapid and alarming escalation in the period immediately preceding the deaths. One person close to the case portrayed the shift as incredibly sudden, yet strikingly devoid of panic on Nick's part. Instead, he appeared oddly focused, a demeanor that, given his documented mental health struggles, struck observers as particularly unsettling. These reports align with medical evaluations conducted since his arrest. Doctors have documented persistent delusional thinking, including Nick's belief that he is the target of a larger conspiracy. He reportedly views his incarceration not as a consequence of his actions, but as part of a setup by external forces intent on framing or persecuting him. This paranoia, sources say, dovetails with prior diagnoses and helps explain his disorganized, delirious state in custody, where he struggles to comprehend even basic elements of his environment. Nick Reiner was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder around 2020, a serious mental illness characterized by a combination of schizophrenia-like symptoms, such as hallucinations and delusions, and mood disturbances, including depression and mania. Following the diagnosis, he was placed on medication that reportedly stabilized him for a time. However, in the month leading up to the murders, his doctors adjusted the regimen, a change that, according to multiple TMZ sources and subsequent reporting, sent his condition spiraling. Insiders have linked the medication switch directly to a severe deterioration, with one account stating it left him off the rails and increasingly homicidal in ideation. Nick had previously been under a year-long mental health conservatorship in 2020, underscoring the long-standing severity of his condition. His parents, by all accounts from family, friends, and reports, had gone to extraordinary lengths to support him through his illness. As the investigation and competency proceedings continue, the case highlights the complex intersection of severe mental illness and criminal responsibility. A forthcoming TMZ Investigates documentary on Fox Nation is expected to delve deeper into these elements, drawing on exclusive sources to provide further context to what has been described as a family's nightmare. The case of Nick Reiner, the son of filmmaker Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle, who stands accused of their murders, has raised serious questions about mental competency to stand trial. Under U.S. legal standards, a defendant must demonstrate a rational understanding of the charges against them, the ability to consult meaningfully with their attorney, and the capacity to make informed decisions, including whether to enter a guilty or not guilty plea, based on reality rather than delusion. Multiple sources close to the situation indicate that Reiner currently falls short of these requirements. Psychiatrists at the Los Angeles County Jail facility, where he is held, continue to fine-tune his medication regimen, but insiders report that his condition remains unstable. One source described the ongoing efforts bluntly. His medications are still not right, and jail doctors are actively working to find an effective balance, yet he persists in experiencing delusions. This instability is not necessarily permanent. Courts often grant time for treatment because individuals with severe mental illnesses can, in many cases, be restored to competency through proper medication and psychiatric care. The pressure on medical staff stems from this potential for restoration, but sources say progress has been gradual and uneven. Reiner's reported diagnosis has evolved in media accounts. Initially described by some outlets as schizophrenia, more recent reporting, including from TMZ, cites sources indicating schizoaffective disorder. This condition blends core psychotic symptoms of schizophrenia, such as paranoia, delusions, and hallucinations, with significant mood disturbances like those seen in bipolar disorder or major depression. Mental health experts note that schizoaffective disorder is notoriously difficult to treat. Medication adjustments require extreme caution to avoid exacerbating symptoms, and the illness can manifest in socially withdrawn or bizarre behavior, emotional volatility, and distorted perceptions of reality. While not always progressive like some forms of schizophrenia, it remains a profoundly challenging and distressing condition for both patients and those around them. Clinicians familiar with psychotic disorders emphasize that non-adherence or dissatisfaction with antipsychotic medications is common. Side effects, ranging from sedation to metabolic changes, can feel intolerable, prompting patients to discontinue treatment, resist adjustments, or push for changes that ultimately prove destabilizing. In Reiner's situation, sources point to a pivotal shift roughly 1 month before the alleged murders. Having reportedly achieved some stability on his prior regimen, Reiner began voicing complaints about significant weight gain, a well-documented side effect of many antipsychotic drugs, including certain atypicals that affect metabolism. According to accounts confirmed across outlets like TMZ and People, physicians accommodated his concerns by switching medications. Harvey Levin of TMZ reported that this adjustment messed Nick up profoundly, aligning with expert warnings that abrupt or major changes in such regimens can dramatically worsen symptoms. For individuals with schizoaffective disorder, these shifts risk intensifying delusions, agitation, confusion, and impaired impulse control, precisely the patterns that later surfaced in jail psychiatric evaluations, including persistent paranoid beliefs, such as claims of a conspiracy behind his incarceration. Family associates and observers have expressed regret that closer monitoring was not in place during this vulnerable transition period, rather than relying primarily on Reiner himself or parental oversight. Mental health professionals stress that even supervised changes carry elevated risk for those with chronic severe illnesses, particularly when compounded by any history of substance use. None of this analysis seeks to excuse the alleged crimes. Instead, it underscores a tragic intersection of severe mental illness, treatment challenges, and high-stakes legal proceedings. The court continues to monitor Reiner's status, balancing due process with the need for competent participation in his defense. The tragic case involving Nick Reiner, the son of filmmaker Rob Reiner, and producer Michelle Singer Reiner, has spotlighted the profound challenges in California's mental health and involuntary commitment systems. Reports indicate that medical professionals had the option under state law to place Nick on a temporary psychiatric hold, typically lasting up to 72 hours. Initially, with extensions possible up to 14 days under certain criteria, to evaluate and stabilize him amid a deteriorating mental state. Yet, as sources close to the investigation have noted, no such extended intervention occurred in the critical period leading up to the December 2025 killings in their Brentwood home. California's Lanterman-Petrus Short, LPS Act, sets a high bar for involuntary holds, requiring evidence of grave disability or imminent danger to self or others due to mental illness. Critics argue this framework often leaves families and clinicians with few tools to intervene effectively in complex cases involving severe mental illness combined with substance use. While details of any prior attempts to hospitalize Nick remain unclear, whether he refused treatment or legal thresholds weren't met, the outcome has fueled calls for reform, as the absence of stabilization appears to have contributed to the catastrophic events. Nick's history includes a documented struggle with schizoaffective disorder, a condition blending symptoms of schizophrenia, such as delusions and hallucinations, and mood disorders. Compounding this was a long pattern of substance abuse. Over the years, he reportedly experimented with heroin, methamphetamine, and cocaine, cycling through at least 18 rehabilitation programs. Brief periods of sobriety were often followed by relapse, a pattern tragically common in chronic addiction. Substance use, particularly stimulants like methamphetamine, can dramatically amplify schizoaffective symptoms. Meth is notorious for heightening paranoia, agitation, and aggression, sometimes termed meth rage, while cocaine and heroin can exacerbate mood instability, delusions, and impaired decision-making. Chronic drug use also interferes with the efficacy of antipsychotic and mood-stabilizing medications, creating a vicious cycle where psychiatric treatment becomes less effective and decompensation accelerates. The brutality of the killings, described by investigators and those briefed on the case as extreme and resembling carnage, has led experts to question whether methamphetamine played a role beyond the mental health diagnosis alone. Dr. Drew Pinsky, appearing on discussions of the case, emphasized that the level of violence exceeded what might be expected from untreated schizoaffective disorder in isolation. The kind of violence that was on display here, to me, still reads methamphetamine, he stated, noting repeatedly that meth is strongly associated with such explosive aggression. Nick was arrested shortly after the murders near Exposition Park in Los Angeles, an area long plagued by open-air drug markets and high levels of illicit activity, similar to nearby MacArthur Park, often described as a notorious drug den. Sources suggest this may not have been an isolated incident. If he was seeking drugs there, it likely reflected an ongoing pattern in the weeks or month prior, potentially as his condition spiraled following a reported adjustment to his psychiatric medications. Psychiatrist Dr. Joseph Witt-Doering, known for his work on psychiatric medication safety and tapering via his channel and analyses, has explained that altering brain chemistry with illicit substances can exacerbate the symptoms and make them exponentially worse. In cases like this, the interplay of untreated or undertreated mental illness, medication changes, and drug use can create a perfect storm of escalating risk. This case underscores broader systemic issues in mental health care, where legal protections for patient autonomy sometimes clash with the urgent need to prevent harm in severe, treatment-resistant conditions intertwined with addiction. As a side note from the original discussion, if you've been dealing with nighttime teeth grinding or jaw clenching, common stress habits affecting around 30% of Americans, custom solutions like those from Remy offer an accessible alternative to traditional dentist-fitted guards. Their at-home impression kit leads to a professional-grade, FDA-cleared night guard at a fraction of the cost, with promotions like 50% off using code HIDDEN at shopremy.com. The combination of a brain already predisposed to delusions and severe mood swings with powerful stimulants created a volatile and dangerous situation, one that eroded judgment and amplified psychotic symptoms while diminishing any remaining self-control. Though authorities have not yet publicly confirmed Nick Reiner's precise actions or state at the exact time of the December 2025 stabbings that killed his parents, director Rob Reiner and producer Michelle Singer Reiner in their Brentwood home his long-documented history of stimulant abuse, a recent change in psychiatric medications, and chronic mental illness, including a schizophrenia diagnosis reported in the weeks before the tragedy, paint a troubling picture of escalating risk. Mental health professionals have repeatedly highlighted a systemic shortfall in Nick's treatment. Most of his numerous rehabilitation stints were brief, typically 30 days or less, and centered almost exclusively on substance detoxification, rather than addressing his co-occurring severe mental disorder, known as dual diagnosis. While short-term programs can stabilize someone during acute withdrawal or provide a temporary respite from drug use, they rarely equip individuals with complex chronic conditions for sustained recovery. Dr. Drew Pinsky, a prominent addiction specialist, has emphasized in public discussions of similar cases that for someone grappling with both addiction and serious psychiatric illness, a standard 30-day inpatient stay offers little lasting benefit. He has argued that such patients often require extended, highly structured residential care, sometimes for years or even indefinitely, to manage symptoms, enforce medication adherence, and rebuild stability. In Nick's situation, the interplay between substance use and mental illness formed a vicious cycle that made consistent treatment extraordinarily challenging. Years before the Brentwood tragedy, his family pursued one of California's most intensive legal interventions. A mental health conservatorship under the Lanterman-Petra Short, LPS, Act, a 1967 law designed to provide court-supervised care for individuals deemed gravely disabled and unable to provide for their basic needs due to severe mental illness. By 2020, Nick's condition had worsened dramatically. Friends described him as unable to care for himself, living on the streets, heavily using drugs, neglecting nutrition, and repeatedly rejecting offers of rehab, all amid the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. The court ultimately appointed a conservator to oversee his medical decisions and finances. For the duration of that roughly one-year arrangement, those close to him observed noticeable improvement. Mandatory drug testing and enforced medication compliance appeared to bring a measure of stability. Yet the conservatorship was not permanent. Once Nick was evaluated as no longer meeting the gravely disabled threshold, the court declined to extend it. Almost immediately afterward, according to accounts from friends, his behavior unraveled. He returned to familiar patterns of substance use and expressed deep resentment toward the loss of independence the arrangement had imposed. Those who knew him said Nick fiercely prized his autonomy, even when it endangered him. He reportedly despised being under someone's thumb, and any suggestion of reinstating conservatorship would have provoked intense resistance. Law enforcement records further illustrate the family's long struggle. Over a 12-year span leading up to the murders, police were called to the Reiner residence in Brentwood at least 6 times. The calls involved welfare checks, reports of possible family disturbances, and mental health crises, unusual volume for the typically serene upscale neighborhood, as noted by officers familiar with the responses. Despite these repeated crises, Rob and Michelle Reiner never withdrew their support. They continued providing financial assistance, emotional backing, and legal advocacy, refusing to abandon their son even as his actions grew increasingly erratic and frightening. That persistent, unconditional love, set against Nick's stubborn refusal to accept structured help, lies at the heart of this heartbreaking saga. More recently, new details have surfaced from a first-hand witness, Danny Spieler, sometimes reported as Danny Filler, who claims he roomed with Nick at a high-end Malibu rehabilitation facility when both were just 15 years old. Spieler has described a troubled young man already displaying intense anger and entitlement, including chilling accounts of resentment toward his parents that have added another layer to understanding the years of turmoil that preceded the December 14, 2025 tragedy. In a recent interview, Danny Spieler, a Wyoming restaurateur who shared a room with Nick Reiner at a high-end Malibu rehabilitation facility, recalled their time together when both were just 15 years old. Spieler described Nick as initially coming across as welcoming and humorous, but he soon noticed a darker, more volatile side that could surface abruptly. Spieler remembered late-night conversations after lights out, where Nick's words struck him as deeply unsettling for someone so young. What lingered most vividly, he said, was Nick's intense resentment toward his parents, Rob Reiner, the acclaimed director behind films like The Princess Bride and When Harry Met Sally, and Michelle Singer Reiner, a photographer and producer. According to Spieler, Nick would rant for hours about how much he fucking hated them, despite the couple's extraordinary efforts to support him. The Reiners reportedly invested millions in his treatment, attended every family therapy group and individual session, and remained consistently involved. Behavior Spieler noted was uncommon among many families at the facility. Spieler highlighted that Nick's anger appeared partly rooted in his father's celebrity status. He really just had oppressed anger towards the fame, Spieler recalled Nick expressing. This detail takes on added weight in light of reports from the night before the murders. Nick allegedly attended a Christmas party at Conan O'Brien's home alongside his parents, who were there partly to supervise him. Guests observed Nick behaving erratically, staring intently at people, asking odd or inappropriate questions such as whether they were famous, and eventually getting into a heated, loud argument with his father that unsettled those around him. Spieler also described moments of physical aggression. He witnessed Nick attack another teenager at the facility, and said Nick later turned on him after a seemingly minor comment triggered an outburst, requiring staff intervention. He portrayed Nick as lacking any sense of gratitude or appreciation for his parents' sacrifices, instead fixating on wanting to party while they prioritized his recovery. Importantly, this account reflects a single, fraught chapter from Nick's adolescence in the mid-2010s, when he was grappling with addiction and mental health challenges. Svilar himself emphasized that resentment toward parents was common among teens in rehab. Many felt trapped in a system not of their choosing, with underdeveloped emotional regulation and perspective. What set Nick apart, in Svilar's view, was an apparent absence of underlying gratitude that others still managed to express amid their complaints. Svilar said he lost contact with Nick after their time in treatment. But when news broke in December 2025 that Rob and Michelle Reiner had been fatally stabbed in their Brentwood home, and their 32-year-old son Nick charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, Svilar said his reaction was immediate. "As soon as I saw it, I knew exactly who it was." He stressed one key point he wanted people to understand: the Reiners loved their son profoundly. "Nick is not insane," Svilar asserted, rejecting any easy dismissal of the case on grounds of mental illness. At the same time, context matters. Teenagers, especially those battling substance abuse, often experience amplified emotions, poor impulse control, and distorted perceptions of parental support. Many people look back on their own journals or behavior at 15 and cringe at the intensity of feelings that felt all-consuming then, but seem narrower in hindsight. Svilar's recollections offer one snapshot from a difficult period, not a complete portrait. The tragedy unfolded just hours after that ill-fated holiday gathering at Conan O'Brien's, where Nick's antisocial demeanor and clash with his father reportedly left guests uneasy and his parents visibly concerned. The case continues to raise questions about long-standing struggles with addiction, family dynamics under the spotlight of fame, and the limits of intervention in such complex situations. In the wake of the shocking deaths of acclaimed director Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle Singer Reiner, psychiatric professionals have highlighted how such traumatic discoveries can serve as potent catalysts for individuals already grappling with mental fragility. Dr. Eugene T. Lucas, Jr., a noted psychiatric expert, has emphasized that harrowing experiences like finding one's parents deceased can profoundly alter behavior, often with precipitating incidents occurring within a mere 24-hour window. This perspective gains added weight in light of Nick Reiner's documented history of mental health struggles, including a year-long conservatorship in 2020, aimed at managing his well-being amid ongoing challenges. Following the grim discovery of his parents' stabbed bodies in their Beverly Hills home on December 14, 2025, Nick Reiner, 32, was located later that same day in the vicinity of Exposition Park near the University of Southern California campus. Locals familiar with the area paint it as a notorious hub for illicit substances, where accessibility to drugs like methamphetamine is alarmingly straightforward. One resident described it bluntly as a drug den where you can get whatever you want, noting that Reiner appeared recognizable, possibly from prior sightings in the area. This observation has fueled speculation about the timeline leading up to his arrest, with nighttime transforming the park into a vibrant, chaotic scene akin to a lit-up Las Vegas Strip, teeming with opportunities for various indulgences. Reiner's own past admissions of drug abuse, starting as early as age 15 and involving multiple stints in treatment, underscore the potential role of substance use in the events. Experts have speculated that the brutality of the killings, marked by multiple stab wounds, could point to a meth-fueled rage, though toxicology results remain pending. A poignant example of the area's perils comes from a 2023 incident in Exposition Park, where a routine police sweep uncovered a network of dealers supplying methamphetamine and other narcotics to transients and students alike, resulting in over a dozen arrests and highlighting the ease of access that has long plagued the neighborhood. Such environments, experts note, can exacerbate vulnerabilities for those with histories like Reiner's, who has openly discussed periods of heavy substance use, including weeks spent in isolation during binges. With Reiner now in custody on 2 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances, legal analysts anticipate a defense strategy centered on a not-guilty plea by reason of insanity. TMZ legal correspondent Charles Latiboudiere has suggested that initial public statements from Reiner's former attorney, Alan Jackson, declaring his client not guilty, were effectively signaling this approach, asserting there's no way he'll plead not guilty outright. Jackson, a high-profile defense lawyer known for handling celebrity cases, abruptly withdrew from representation on January 7, 2026, during a court hearing, attributing the decision to circumstances beyond our control and beyond Nick's control. He elaborated in a statement outside the courtroom. I'm legally and ethically prohibited from explaining all the reasons why. We expect the public defender to step in. They've already been appointed and very capably protect Nick Reiner's interests as he moves forward through the system. But be clear, be very, very clear about this. My team and I remain deeply, deeply committed to Nick Reiner and to his best interests. Sources close to the family reveal they were caught off guard and distressed by Jackson's exit and his preceding media comments, which they believed amplified scrutiny on an already devastating ordeal. Jackson later reflected on the withdrawal, describing his emotions as rooted in frustration, while reaffirming his team's dedication. Everything that I said is absolutely true. It remains true. I can't describe enough how committed my entire team was. This shift has paved the way for a public defender to take over, as Reiner, removed from suicide watch earlier in January, prepares for further proceedings. Adding layers to the narrative, Reiner has reportedly admitted to the killings but expressed confusion about his incarceration, according to sources. This admission echoes broader discussions on familial violence, as criminologists at Northeastern University have labeled the case an unusual instance of patricide and matricide, often linked to underlying mental health and substance issues. In a parallel story from 2018, a similar high-profile family tragedy in California involved a son under the influence of methamphetamine who fatally attacked his parents during a psychotic episode, later acquitted on insanity grounds after evidence of a medication change triggered the violence, drawing eerie comparisons to speculations in Reiner's situation. As the case unfolds, it continues to spotlight the intersections of mental illness, addiction, and family dynamics in Hollywood's underbelly, with potential new evidence poised to influence the outcome. The defense effort for Nick Reiner, the 32-year-old son of filmmaker Rob Reiner and producer Michelle Singer Reiner, charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of his parents, unfolded with extraordinary intensity in its opening phase. For 3 grueling weeks following his arrest in late 2025, the legal team, led at the time by high-profile attorney Alan Jackson, operated in full triage mode. It was a rocket ship, one member of the defense described in a recent podcast reflection. Virtually everything else was sidelined as the attorneys raced to stay ahead of prosecutors, gathering evidence, filing motions, and preparing for what could become a landmark confrontation between the government and the defense. In high-stakes murder cases involving prominent families, defense lawyers often speak of this relentless pace as essential, not merely to keep up with law enforcement, but to outpace them and protect their clients' rights at every turn. Personal lives evaporated during those weeks. You forget you have any personal life that you might have, the source continued. Other clients received minimal attention, family obligations were deferred, and the entire focus narrowed to one objective: mounting the strongest possible defense amid mounting public scrutiny and media pressure. That momentum shattered when Jackson formally withdrew as counsel during a brief court appearance on January 7, 2026. The withdrawal, attributed in part to funding uncertainties and strategic differences, forced the defense to step aside at a critical juncture, leaving the team incredibly frustrated. A public defender was appointed in his place, and the arraignment was rescheduled for February 23, 2026. Funding has emerged as a major complicating factor. Nick Reiner, who has long struggled with severe mental illness and substance addiction, and reportedly never held independent employment, historically relied on financial support from his parents. Following the killings, sources close to the family indicate that his siblings, Jake and Romy Reiner, made the painful decision to sever all financial assistance for his legal defense. Insiders have described the move as unanimous and final, with the siblings concluding they could no longer support him financially, emotionally, or morally, given the nature of the allegations. Some reports suggest that legal expenses may now draw from aspects of the parents' estate, though California's Salmon Slayer statute generally bars those who kill from profiting from the victim's estate. Exceptions and probate complexities can sometimes allow limited use for defense costs in practice. This financial reality has raised concerns about the adequacy of resources for expert witnesses, independent psychiatric evaluations, and thorough trial preparation, elements that can prove decisive in cases where mental health is central. Jake and Romy Reiner have grieved largely in private, issuing only limited public statements since the tragedy. In mid-December 2025, they described their parents as our best friends and expressed unimaginable pain at the loss, while emphasizing efforts to honor Rob and Michelle's legacy of compassion and leadership. A source close to the siblings characterized their anguish as layered, not only mourning their parents, but also grappling with the profound sense that they have lost their brother as well. They have steadfastly avoided further media engagement as coverage intensifies. The case underscores persistent failures at the intersection of severe mental illness, addiction, and the criminal justice system. Nick Reiner's documented history includes periods of instability, medication adjustments, and inadequate long-term care, issues that temporary interventions have repeatedly failed to address. Competency proceedings will likely dominate the coming months, with psychiatric evaluations already underway, or anticipated to determine whether he can meaningfully participate in his defense. As the February 23, 2026 court date approaches, the proceedings will force broader societal reckoning. What happens when profound untreated mental health crises collide with a system often reliant on short-term fixes rather than sustained support? The outcome will shape not only the legal fate of the accused, but also public understanding of these intertwined failures. For deeper insight into the psychological dimensions, recent episodes of the podcast featuring Dr. John Matthias, a clinical and forensic psychologist, explore these aspects in detail. Links available in the episode description. Stay tuned for an upcoming return appearance by Dr. Matthias, offering an even closer examination of the mental health factors at play in this heartbreaking case. Subscribe and enable notifications to catch new episodes as they drop.